Rubina, who was around 28 years old, was a widow and had a 6-year-old son named Rehan. Her parents had passed away, and she had spent most of her childhood at the home of a poor maternal aunt. Even after marriage, life did not become easier for her. Her husband would travel for labor, sometimes to Karachi, sometimes to a big factory in Punjab. Eventually, he passed away in an accident. At that time, Rubina's biggest concern was how she would raise her son. When the situation worsened, she heard from a known woman that there was an opportunity to go to Saudi Arabia as a housemaid. The salaries there could be higher. Rubina hesitated at first, wondering how she would survive in a foreign land, but her son's need convinced her. Within a few days, she contacted an agent, prepared her passport and documents, and entrusted her son to her aunt. Her aunt promised to look after the boy until Rubina returned. A week later, she arrived at the airport. Sitting in an airplane for the first time brought a strange nervousness. She also had doubts in her heart about what fate had written for her. When the plane took off, she closed her eyes and silently kept praying. After a few hours, the plane landed on the soil of Saudi Arabia. The immigration process and other formalities were quite exhausting. At last, a man sent by the agent came to receive her and seated her in a car. On the way, she was amazed to see the tall buildings and magnificent highways. There was a luxurious house in a vast area where she was to be employed. The entrance gate was made of iron, inside which were date palm trees and a long pathway leading to the main building. A guard always sat at the gate. The man took her inside and introduced her to the head maid of the house, who seemed to be quite strict. She informed Rubina that the owner of the house was named Sultan Yahya, a businessman. He had 2 wives, one named Aliyah and the other Mariam. Both were often out or engrossed in their own interests. Most of the household responsibilities were on the shoulders of the servants. Rubina was given a room with a bed and a small cupboard. There were strict rules inside the house. She was told that she would have to wake up early and follow specific duties, sometimes cleaning the kitchen, sometimes watering the lawn or cleaning the rooms. In the beginning, it was quite difficult for her because she didn't know Arabic or much English, but gradually she learned to work through gestures. Some of the other servants were from Pakistan and India, which made things a bit easier for her. After a few days, she learned that the 2 wives of the house owner were rarely present, and Sultan himself was often away on business trips. Most of the management of the house was handled by the staff. One day, there was sudden news that Sultan Yahya was arriving, and everyone was instructed to be alert. That very evening, the house became unusually active. Madame Aliyah called in advance and had many preparations arranged. Madame Mariam also arrived by night. The staff received instructions that nothing should fall short. In the evening, when Sultan Yahya arrived, many staff members stood at the gate. A long car drove in, and a dignified man stepped out, middle-aged but with a serious and mysterious expression on his face. He exchanged brief greetings with a few of the servants and went straight inside. Rubina got a chance to see him as he was passing by the kitchen. She quickly lowered her head. She thought, "This is the very man whose house I've come to for my livelihood. May Allah make everything go well." From the next day, preparations for a feast began in the house. It was heard that Sultan was inviting relatives to celebrate an important business deal. Large trays, luxurious dishes, expensive fruits, everything was being brought in. Rubina was given the responsibility of assisting in the kitchen. At the same time, she was clearly told that there was no room for mistakes. Madame Aliyah and Mariam's strict eyes were constantly on the staff so that nothing would go wrong. Rubina was also scolded once when she didn't slice the tomatoes correctly for the salad. She silently endured it. On the evening of the feast, high-profile guests began to arrive. One after another, luxury cars entered the premises. Rubina was astonished to see such a wealthy class. The preparation of dozens of dishes in the kitchen had exhausted her. When she carried a tray of food into the dining hall, she was nervous seeing the crowd of guests. She quickly placed the tray on the table and was about to leave when suddenly Sultan called out to her, "Are you new here?" Rubina hesitated and replied, Yes, I came just last week." Sultan nodded and asked, "What's your name?" She softly told him her name and quickly turned back. That night felt strange to Rubina. For the first time, she realized that such an important man had spoken to her. At the same time, she felt scared. What if the mistresses found out and got angry? The next morning, while she was working, Sultan suddenly came into the kitchen. He tried to engage in brief conversation, asking where she was from, whether she was married or not, etc. Rubina told him that she was a widow and had left her son in Pakistan. Sultan nodded with a peculiar seriousness and said, "May Allah make things easier." Then he silently left. It was a minor conversation, but for the old staff of the house, it rang alarm bells. They noticed that Sultan was taking interest in a new maid. Some passed this information to Madame Aliyah, others informed Mariam. As a result, both mistresses became alert. They gave strict instructions to the servants to keep an eye on Rubina. If she tried to get close to Sultan, they were to report immediately. The mistresses were afraid that Sultan might start giving her too much attention. For a few days, Sultan remained at home and occasionally spoke to Rubina, just a gesture or a small question. It was insignificant, but to the mistresses it felt like a warning sign. One day, Madame Aliyah summoned Rubina and said, "You should remain confined to the kitchen. There's no need to roam around." Rubina defended herself, saying she was just performing her duties. Aliyah said sternly, "If I even slightly suspect that you're trying to manipulate others, I will have you removed immediately." Hearing this, Rubina became frightened. But the problem was that Sultan himself would occasionally come to speak with her. One evening, while she was watering the plants in the lawn, Sultan arrived and asked for some drinking water. When Rubina brought the jug and glass, he gently asked how her son was. Did she miss him? Tears welled up in Rubina's eyes. She replied, "Yes, sir. Circumstances have forced me. Otherwise, what mother wants to stay away from her child?" Seeing her emotion, Sultan fell silent, then walked away deep in thought. That sympathy slowly began to form a soft corner in Sultan's heart. In that house, he witnessed abundance of wealth, but very little sincerity. The mistresses were mostly interested in outward display and luxury. They kept a distance from the servants. In such a setting, a simple widow's hard work and tears began to draw his attention. One day, Sultan found the right moment and finally spoke his heart to Rubina. "You are very patient," he said gently. "Have you ever thought about moving forward in life?" Rubina was startled. She looked at him confused. "I only want to save some money for my son," she replied in a low voice. Sultan took a deep breath. "What if I offer you marriage?" he asked. Those words struck Rubina like lightning. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She stared at Sultan, stunned. She couldn't comprehend how someone so influential, the owner of such a grand home, could talk about marrying her. Panicking, she replied, "No, that's not possible. You already have wives. I'm just a housemaid." "I know this is unusual," Sultan said calmly, "but your simplicity has touched my heart. I've noticed how the luxury of this house hasn't affected you. All you ever think about is your son. I want to give you the respect you truly deserve." It felt like a dream. Rubina didn't say anything. Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly ran away. From the next day, she made efforts to avoid being seen by Sultan. Yet a strange conflict started brewing in her heart. On one hand, the thought that if she accepted his proposal, her son's future could be secured, and her financial troubles might finally end. On the other hand, there was fear. Fear of Madame Aliyah and Mariam's wrath, fear of society's reaction, and a lingering doubt. What if Sultan was not serious? What if this was just a passing fancy? This inner conflict began to eat her up. Meanwhile, Madame Aliyah and Mariam also started to suspect that Sultan's attention was leaning toward Rubina. They began tightening their control. Every time Rubina made even a small mistake, she was scolded harshly. She was kept under strict observation. One day, Madame Mariam even entered Rubina's room without warning and began searching it, suspecting her of stealing something valuable. Rubina burst into tears. "I swear on my child, I've done nothing wrong. I've only come here to earn my bread," she sobbed. A few weeks later, Sultan arranged a small private gathering at home, inviting only a few close friends. Though the event was low-key, the food preparation was still a huge task. Rubina was running back and forth doing chores throughout the evening. It was late at night when all the guests had left. She was alone in the kitchen washing dishes. Quietly, Sultan entered the kitchen. In a soft voice, he asked, "Have you thought about what I said?" Rubina turned slowly and said, "You're putting me in a difficult position. I don't know what to do." "I'm being honest," Sultan replied sincerely. "I truly want to marry you. I've never felt this kind of sincerity before, not even in my lavish life." but I see it in you." These words echoed deep within Rubina's heart. She lowered her eyes and said softly, "Please, give me some time." In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house grew tense. Madame Aaliyah and Miriam became even more hostile. They instructed other workers to keep their distance from Rubina, calling her untrustworthy. Rubina often found herself isolated. Sometimes she didn't even get a proper meal and had to quietly eat leftovers when no one was looking. She thought to herself, "My life has always been difficult, but now I feel trapped in a strange web." On one side, there was Sultan's proposal. On another, the wrath of the two wives. And on the third, her son's uncertain future in Pakistan. Eventually, Sultan took a small but meaningful step. He secretly gave Rubina a new SIM card so she could contact her son. He also gave her some money to send gifts back home. This was all done discreetly, but Madame Aaliyah found out soon enough. One evening, she confronted Rubina and shouted, "How dare you take money from Sultan? This isn't your ancestral home. I'll make your stay here impossible." Rubina trembled with fear, unable to say a word in her defense. A few days later, Sultan had to leave suddenly for a business trip. In Sultan's absence, Madame Aaliyah and Mariam unleashed their full cruelty upon Rubina. She was removed from kitchen duties and reassigned to room cleaning, but even then, she was constantly scolded for no reason. At times, she would be yelled at out of nowhere. One day, mustering courage, Rubina asked, "Why are you doubting me so much? I haven't done anything wrong." Madame Miriam replied with a mocking tone, "Oh, we know your type very well. Women like you know how to steal hearts." Rubina broke down in tears, but no one showed her mercy. Eventually, Sultan returned from his trip. The tension in the house was palpable. When he saw the harsh atmosphere and the fear in the servants' faces, he grew furious. He immediately questioned Aaliyah and Miriam about why a housemaid was being treated with such hostility. Instead of giving a clear answer, they accused Rubina of interfering in their marital life. They claimed she was trying to disrupt their peace and manipulate the household with her sob stories. Sultan didn't believe them at once. He quietly started asking around, maids, drivers, even the security guard, and soon the truth came out. It wasn't Rubina causing problems, it was the mistresses who had been behaving unfairly. Sultan called Rubina and asked gently, "Are you truly this troubled?" Through her tears, Rubina poured out her heart, everything she had endured. Sultan listened silently, then reassured her, "I won't let you face this alone anymore." And then he made a bold decision. He invited a trusted religious scholar to the house. In the quiet of the night, in the presence of a few loyal witnesses, Sultan performed a nikah with Rubina. The ceremony was simple, discreet, and done within the bounds of Islamic law. There was no noise, no announcements. Madame Aaliyah and Miriam remained unaware that a life-changing event had just occurred within their own home. By the next morning, however, word had spread. When the mistresses learned about the marriage, a storm erupted in the household. They screamed, argued, and shouted at Sultan in disbelief. "How is this even possible?" they cried. "How could you do this behind our backs?" Soon, some family members arrived, shocked and disapproving. They sat Sultan down and tried to talk sense into him. "This is disgraceful," they said. "You've humiliated the family name by marrying a servant. Have you lost all sense?" But Sultan stood his ground. "This is my right," he replied firmly. "I have committed no sin. I have given dignity to someone who deserved it." Aaliyah and Miriam revolted. They delivered an ultimatum. "Either you divorce Rubina, or we will leave this house forever." Sultan replied calmly but clearly, "I won't stop anyone from leaving. That's your choice. But I will not undo this marriage." Some relatives still tried to convince him otherwise, but his determination was unshakable. Eventually, both Aaliyah and Mariam packed their bags and left, saying they would stay with their families until further notice. And just like that, the grand home fell into a haunting silence. For Rubina, this brought both relief and worry. The house was quiet, peaceful even, but the looming fear of what might come next never left her heart. She often wondered, when the mistresses return, what storm will they bring? Sultan attempted to reconcile with them through messages and mediators, but the mistresses refused to talk. Rumors and whispers began to circulate. Some servants whispered behind doors, some relatives spread gossip, but Sultan didn't care. I have performed a lawful nikah, he said openly. I've done nothing wrong. If my wives can't accept that, it's their decision. Days passed, but the tension remained. Then one day, Rubina noticed that Sultan was unusually quiet and anxious. She asked him what was wrong. He admitted that even some of his business partners had begun pressuring him. They say this scandal affects our business, he confessed. They want me to end this marriage or risk losing their partnership. Rubina's eyes filled with tears. If this causes you loss, please let me go. I'll return to Pakistan. But Sultan shook his head. If I leave you, I'll lose my humanity. Weeks passed in this state of confusion. The family remained divided. Some members quietly supported Sultan, others condemned him. Finally, Sultan addressed his business team. If anyone wants to cut ties with me because I married a widow with dignity, they're free to do so. But I will not sacrifice my marriage. Slowly, people began to understand that he was serious. Some still withdrew, but others softened their stance. One day, Madame Aliyah and Mariam returned to the house. They told Sultan plainly, "If you want to keep your second marriage, then separate us from your life." Sultan understood very well that the root of Aliyah and Mariam's anger was not love, but fear and social pressure. He responded firmly, "I will never force any wife to stay with me against her will. But if you choose to remain in this house, you must also accept my third wife." Aliyah and Mariam were livid. They fumed with silent rage, but they had no choice. Reluctantly and with wounded pride, they agreed to stay in the house. But they completely distanced themselves from Rubina. And so, Rubina began to live in the same house, now not as a servant, but with the status of a wife. After a few months, she called for her son from Pakistan. Sultan made sure all the official documentation was arranged. When the boy finally arrived, the household staff were stunned. The woman who was once just a maid was now a madam of the house, and her son walked through the marble halls like a little prince. Although Aliyah and Mariam burned with jealousy at the sight, they could say nothing. Sultan's authority was unshakable. It was as though light had finally entered Rubina's life. Slowly, even some extended family members began to fall silent. Some accepted it as destiny's strange play, others disapproved quietly in their hearts but chose not to speak. Aliyah and Mariam eventually called a truce, at least on the surface. They stopped direct confrontations, though jealousy and coldness still lingered beneath their composed exteriors. Rubina began adjusting to this new reality. Sometimes she would sit alone and think, if only my husband were still alive, maybe I would never have needed to take this step. At other times, she felt a quiet certainty in her heart that perhaps this was Allah's divine wisdom, pulling her out of misery and into dignity. Of all the blessings that came from this unexpected turn in life, the greatest was for her son. He was now enrolled in a good school, had comforts he had never imagined before, and lived a safe, nurturing life. Rubina took on some responsibilities in the household as well. She often checked the kitchen to make sure everything was running smoothly. She treated the servants with kindness and respect. Some of the workers actually appreciated her presence. "She used to work just like us," one cook whispered. "Even now, she hasn't let pride get to her." This, of course, annoyed Aliyah and Mariam even more. Not only was a former maid now an equal in title, but she was also loved by the household staff, something they had never truly experienced. Though life was still far from perfect, at least the open warfare had ended. Time moved on. Sultan focused on restructuring his business. He absorbed some financial losses but didn't give up. During this period, even one or two skeptical relatives began to realize that Rubina was not some scheming woman after all. She was simple, sincere, and clearly not in it for wealth. Slowly, they accepted that perhaps this truly was written in fate. Then came a day when all the wives happened to be present in the house at the same time. Sultan took the opportunity to make an official announcement. "I want to formally register Rubina as my legal wife in government records," he said calmly. This enraged Aliyah and Mariam once again. They protested bitterly, but this time their words held little weight. Sultan proceeded undeterred. He completed all legal paperwork and officially registered the marriage at the national level. Rubina now held legal recognition as his legitimate wife. Another storm brewed in the family, but it too passed, like all the others before it. Everyone had realized by now that Sultan wouldn't bow to anyone's opinion on this matter. Amid this evolving chapter, a new worry arose. Rubina noticed that her son was unwell. He had a minor infection, but she became anxious. Sultan acted immediately. He rushed the boy to a reputable hospital, arranged the best doctors, and oversaw the treatment himself. For Rubina, this was a moment of awakening. She thought, I'm just a poor woman from a village. I could never have afforded these resources, and now that I have them, surely this is nothing short of a divine reward. She felt immense gratitude in her heart and thanked Allah quietly for every little blessing she now had. Back at home, while Aliyah and Mariam had mostly fallen silent, their bitterness occasionally leaked out. One day, Mariam saw Rubina wearing a new outfit and couldn't resist a jab. Well, but someone's really looking like a queen these days, she sneered. Rubina simply smiled and replied, all thanks to Allah. That calm, gentle response acted like water on burning coal. The room fell silent. Gradually, everyone began to accept that Rubina was now a true member of the household. Over time, Sultan's business also began to recover. New contracts were signed, and deals started falling into place. Many family members who had previously distanced themselves out of anger now started returning. But Sultan made his stance absolutely clear to everyone. I am free to make my own decisions. If anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to keep their opinions to themselves. This firm message prevented any further debates. Peace returned. Rubina's son was doing well too. He had grown disciplined and hardworking, now receiving a well-rounded education in both Arabic and English. He was enrolled in both a madrasa and a regular school, something she never could have imagined before. One evening, as the warm light of dusk filled the veranda, Sultan asked Rubina gently, do you feel like anything is missing in your life? Rubina smiled softly and replied, I have everything I could ever need. But if there's one thing I'd wish for, it's more time with my son. Sultan nodded with understanding. That's your right, he said. I'll speak with the staff and make sure your household chores are reduced so you can spend more time with him. Rubina thanked him with a full heart. She sometimes wondered if Aliyah and Mariam would ever soften toward her. But that day had not yet come. Though there were fewer confrontations, a cold silence remained. Occasionally she would hear a passing remark or sense a stare, but she endured it with quiet dignity. Many months passed peacefully. During that time, there were a few family events where all three wives had to appear together in public. By then, most people were aware of the situation and behaved with controlled politeness. A few still looked down on Rubina, casting judging glances, but she didn't let it affect her. She reminded herself, I have done nothing wrong. Fate simply brought me here. If I had to enter this household as a maid to one day become its daughter-in-law, so be it. That was Allah's plan. Sometime later, Madame Aliyah began distancing herself from the household. It was said she now spent more time with her friends or out shopping. Madame Mariam also gradually withdrew. As a result, many of the house's responsibilities began to fall upon Rubina. She managed everything with wisdom and patience, never overstepping, but always ensuring things ran smoothly. Sultan supported her in every way, and soon the staff and even some guests began to view her as a responsible and graceful woman of the house. It was still hard for some to believe that a village widow who had once worked here as a maid had now risen to such a respected status. Whispers spread among relatives. She must have used black magic, some said. Others simply admitted, this is nothing but destiny. But Rubina always responded humbly, I came here with the intention to earn a living for my son. Allah opened the doors I never imagined. Whether people believed her or not didn't matter anymore. The truth was clear. Her sincerity, hard work, and perseverance had changed the course of her life. Rubina was now even supporting her family back in Pakistan. She sent money when needed, helped them repair their modest home, and supported her aunt, the very woman who had raised her son in her absence. When her son left for Saudi Arabia, her aunt had wept with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Back in the village, Rubina's story became a topic of conversation. Women would cite her example, saying, when you have courage, Allah provides the path. Meanwhile, Sultan's business continued to flourish. One day, he said to Rubina, "I want to start teaching our son the basics of the business. When he grows up, he should be able to help." Rubina's heart swelled with happiness. She wholeheartedly supported the idea. She thought to herself, "This is an incredible opportunity for my child. I never dreamed he would be taught like a future heir." Aliyah and Mariam may have felt a sting of jealousy, but they didn't voice it. Perhaps they too had realized by now that resisting change was pointless. This was their new reality. Protesting further would only bring exhaustion. The final blow, however, came when a few senior members of the family approached Sultan. They said, "If you wish to restore peace, you can still end this marriage. Everyone might be satisfied then." But another spoke more truthfully. "It's already too late. You've even brought a child into this home. There's no going back now." Sultan's response was calm and unwavering. "I have no regrets," he said. "None at all. Rubina is a part of my honor. I will never leave her now." Sultan's clear and final declaration extinguished any remaining hopes of reversal. After that, no one dared to interfere formally again. Now that the internal matters of the household had begun to stabilize, Rubina started focusing on bettering herself. She expressed interest in enrolling in online courses in Urdu and English. Sultan, always supportive, arranged a laptop and internet access for her. Every evening, Rubina would help her son with his homework, balancing household responsibilities alongside her personal growth. She remained committed and steady. Madame Aliyah and Madame Mariam still occasionally gave her strange, lingering looks, but they no longer had the courage for open confrontation. During this time, another family gathering was scheduled. Sultan intended to take all three wives with him, but once again, Aliyah and Mariam refused. "We cannot go anywhere with that woman," they said firmly. Sultan didn't argue. "If you don't want to go, that's your choice. I will take Rubina." And so, for the first time, Rubina was officially included in a family event at Sultan's side. When they arrived at the gathering, a few people did make faces openly, but most greeted her politely, offering formal courtesies. Rubina maintained her simplicity, avoiding any arguments, staying kind and composed. Some relatives, in fact, felt a sense of sympathy for her, recognizing the emotional pressure she had endured. A couple of women took her aside and quietly asked, "Are you truly happy?" Rubina smiled and replied calmly, "Alhamdulillah, I'm content." Deep inside, she knew the hearts of her critics still harbored resentment. But she also understood one truth: time tires everyone out. Eventually, resistance fades. After the event, there was considerable talk within the family. Everyone now understood clearly. Sultan had openly and officially accepted Rubina as his third wife. Even the elders who had cut ties with him began to soften. They realized that clinging to bitterness was hurting the family more than helping. Back home, Madame Aliyah and Madame Mariam were present, but noticeably quieter. They had begun to accept the passage of time. Though the inner jealousy remained, neither was willing to risk reigniting a major conflict. For Rubina, this shift brought a kind of peace. She had learned that after every storm, calmness eventually finds its way. Some months later, Sultan's business achieved a remarkable breakthrough. He entered a partnership with a foreign company, and profits were expected to double. Relatives who had once opposed him now came to offer congratulations, including some who had once spoken against Rubina most harshly. To celebrate, Sultan hosted a modest event at home. Initially, Aliyah and Mariam declined to attend, but eventually they were forced to show up as their absence was drawing attention. At the gathering, for the first time, all three wives appeared together, at least on the surface. Observers couldn't help but notice that despite their complicated history, there was no tension, no visible disdain. It was as if, somehow, a truce had truly been formed. Later, it was revealed that Sultan's success had been a mix of his persistent hard work and a few unexpected external factors that suddenly aligned in his favor. Once again, murmurs arose in the family. "Rubina is lucky," they said. "Her presence has brought blessings into the house." Others dismissed it as mere coincidence. Rubina made no claims. "Who can challenge fate?" she would say with a smile. She often reflected on the journey she had taken. There was a time, she thought, when I couldn't even afford proper meals. My son was on the edge of hunger, and now? Allah has raised us to a place where people call me fortunate. One day, her son came home from school beaming with joy. He had won a prize in a school competition. Sultan praised him and gave him a gift in celebration. Even Madame Mariam had to offer congratulations. These little moments spoke volumes. They were signs that little by little, the members of the household were beginning to accept one another. Perhaps they had no other choice left. The truth is, human beings are often slaves to circumstances, and when the water rises above your head, you're left with no option but to accept reality. And so, Rubina's days gradually became easier. She realized that no one could remove her from this home now. Her place, her status, was firm. Yet even with that sense of stability, she remained humble. She never allowed pride to enter her heart or look down upon anyone else. She always reminded herself, I am a widow who was once completely helpless, and yet I reached this unimaginable place. That is purely Allah's grace, not my own doing. Sometimes her past would resurface in her thoughts, those lonely nights in a small village living at the mercy of her aunt, and now? She sat on a cushioned chair in a mansion-like home, not as a servant, but as a wife. Her eyes would fill with tears, not of sadness, but of awe at how far she had come. There were whispers that Sultan might organize a grand wedding ceremony in the future to officially present Rubina to the extended family. But Sultan did no such thing. He wasn't fond of unnecessary attention. He had fulfilled the essential religious and legal obligations and made things clear within the house. That was enough for him. Slowly, life resumed its normal rhythm. Aliyah and Mariam would still, from time to time, flash cold stares or speak with subtle sharpness, but they no longer dared create major drama. They understood now that Sultan would never leave this wife. Rubina, meanwhile, started thinking more deeply about how to further improve her life. She was already fluent in reading and writing Urdu, but her English was weak. She decided to join online English courses. Sultan, ever supportive, arranged for a teacher he knew to come to the house twice a week. In just a few months, Rubina had made great progress. She not only helped her son with his homework now, but she also began understanding the household's financial matters. Sultan was impressed. He didn't want his wife to just carry the title. He wanted her to grow intellectually, to walk beside him not only in name, but in thought. One evening, while everyone was enjoying light conversation after dinner, Sultan made an unexpected announcement. I've decided to launch a new company, Gizhads, he said, and I want Rubina to be a partner in it. There was a flicker of emotion on Aliyah and Mariam's faces, but they said nothing. Some family members, however, heard of it and commented privately, now he wants to give her everything. Rubina, hesitant and nervous, asked quietly, do you really think that's appropriate? Sultan smiled. Of course. You are my wife. Your involvement would be an honor for me. A wave of joy rose in Rubina's heart. It wasn't about money. It was about being trusted. It was about being seen as capable, worthy. Meanwhile, back in Pakistan, her brother continued receiving financial help. With that support, he had managed to grow his small business. During their phone calls, he would often say, Sister, I still can't believe how respected your life has become there. Rubina would reply, it's all Allah's mercy. I am just grateful for the path He created. Her brother shared that even the village people often asked about her. Some joked, don't forget us now that you're such a grand lady. Rubina would laugh it off, but in her heart she thought, I'm still the same simple woman, just a mother who gave everything for her child's future. At home, the situation had now settled into an unspoken structure. Each of the three wives had their own space, their own corner of life. But Sultan's emotional leaning was clearly toward Rubina. Aliyah and Mariam had quietly accepted this reality, even if they weren't happy. Outwardly, there were no more fights, no more loud confrontations. At family gatherings, no one asked questions anymore. Everyone understood this chapter was no longer open for debate. People simply said, Sultan has the right to marry more than once, but it's his responsibility to treat his wives with justice. And Sultan stood firm. I've done nothing wrong. In the end, everyone fell silent. Years began to pass. Rubina's son excelled in his studies. He was nearing his college years now, ambitious and hopeful for a respectable career. Madame Aliyah and Mariam also had children, but they were older, busy with their own pursuits. The household now resembled a patchwork version of a family, imperfect, layered, yet still holding together. Yes, tensions remained. Rivalries still existed in glances and silences. But no major storm had come in a long time, and Rubina thought that in itself is a blessing. She often remembered her early days in the house, the fear, the humiliation, the endless judgment, how far she had come. One day, as they were casually chatting after dinner, Sultan asked her, "Do you ever think about why you chose this path?" Rubina paused and said quietly, "I only came here for my son's sake. I never imagined I would end up in a place like this, married to someone like you. It was never part of a plan, it was just destiny." Sultan smiled. Yes, it was destiny, but it was also your courage. If you had been weak, if you had given up halfway, you would have returned home defeated. But you didn't. Rubina lowered her gaze, thoughtful. She realized how true that was. Had I broken down, none of this would have happened. And that is how this story reached its peak. A tale where a poor widow, with truth in her heart and strength in her soul, climbed a mountain no one thought she could. She lived in a world surrounded by wealth, pride, manipulation, and yet she never once used cunning or deceit. She chose patience. She chose dignity. And in doing so, she became not just the wife of a rich man, but a woman of worth in her own right. This story carries a powerful message. No matter how harsh your circumstances, if your intentions are pure and your cause is just, the world eventually makes room for your light. Rubina took bold steps for her son's future. She endured cruelty. She stayed quiet when insulted. She kept going when it felt impossible. And in the end, she found a place of peace, love, and respect. The final lesson? A person's true spirit and endurance never go to waste. Fate can bless anyone at any time. The only condition is that you never give up and stay true to yourself. Rubina, once a widow with no money and no backing, opened the doors of destiny with nothing but resilience. And with that, this story comes to its close, leaving behind a lasting reminder. Never underestimate anyone. Never dismiss any moment as insignificant. Because if Allah wills, even the impossible becomes possible. Rubina's journey is not just the story of one woman, it's a universal reminder of how powerful human resilience can be. She didn't conquer her trials with force, wealth, or influence. She had none of that. What she did have was sincerity, humility, and unwavering perseverance. Despite being surrounded by doubt, envy, and pressure, Rubina chose not to retaliate with pride or vengeance. She chose silence over rebellion, patience over bitterness, and faith over fear, and slowly, without even realizing it, she became a mirror for others, reflecting what quiet strength and dignity truly look like. The moral of this story is simple yet profound. No hardship is permanent if your intentions are pure, your efforts consistent, and your faith intact. Even in a world that values status and appearance, the truth of a good heart will always shine through, eventually. Rubina proved that greatness is not born from wealth or heritage. It's carved out slowly, through sacrifice, love, and the refusal to give up. And that is why, by the end, she wasn't just accepted. She was respected, she was loved, and most importantly, she was at peace.